This is Giving the Game Away, the podcast where we explore the journeys of elite athletes and uncover lesser spoken about topics from the world of sport. And coming up on today's episode.
But yeah, Poland syndrome, very rare condition. It's about 1 in 100,000 people that have it. For me, it means that I'm missing my right pectoral muscle and 2 ribs that are directly behind where that muscle should be. I achieved what I achieved with what I had means that there are so many more people that can do that. I was getting little hamstring tears and little niggles that most athletes get, and my coach had said, "Why don't you try yoga?" I was like, no, it's not for me. But I just gritted my teeth and decided to try it out one day. And then after that, I just started feeling so much better. I went from getting an injury every 3 months to not getting a single one in 18 months.
So today we're speaking to Lewis Hatchett, the former Sussex cricketer who has a really incredible story. He fulfilled his dream of becoming a professional cricketer despite being born with Poland syndrome, a rare congenital condition which means he is missing his right pectoral muscle and 2 ribs. The condition actually led to doctors at his birth saying that he shouldn't play any sport at all throughout his life, but during his childhood, Lewis used that as motivation, and he just wanted to prove the doctors and all the doubters wrong and become a professional cricketer despite having Poland syndrome. His story is one of defiance, resilience and determination, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about it.
He's got an incredible story and one that is truly inspiring, and I'm really looking forward to hearing how he was able to keep persevering and end up making his goals a reality despite being told that he wouldn't actually be able to play sport at all due to his condition. I'm looking forward as well to hearing the insights that he's gained from working with elite athletes all around the world through his business called Sport Yogi and his own podcast as well called Raising Your Game. Sport Yogi helps athletes enhance their performance through yoga, mindfulness and breath work. And as he says, it's not about getting athletes to join the ashram, it's just about finding something simple for their body and their mind to deal with the stresses and the strains that are placed on it in professional sport. And I think that's just quite an interesting and fascinating way of looking at elite performance and how to enhance it.
So thanks for coming on, Lewis. Your story is obviously one of defiance, resilience, determination, and just a relentless dedication in pursuit of your ultimate goal, which was to become a professional cricketer. And these are all important characteristics to succeed in sport, and we'll delve into them in this interview. But despite those mental attributes you obviously possess, it wasn't always clear that you were going to make it as a professional athlete because you were actually born with Poland syndrome, which is obviously a really rare condition. Can you explain to us a little bit more about Poland syndrome and how it actually impacted you?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm excited for this chat that we're about to have. Look, my career is a unique one. It's one that I've spoken about now for probably the last 5 years, I guess, and it kind of went unnoticed because I hid it for a little while. For those who wouldn't have seen me on the internal side of the game and sort of in the changing rooms. But yeah, Poland syndrome, very rare condition. It's about 1 in 100,000 people that have it. It manifests itself fairly differently from people that have it. Some people can have deformities in their hands. They can be affected on their left side. For me, it's on my right side. And for me, it means that I'm missing my right pectoral muscle and 2 ribs that are directly behind where that muscle should be. So for anyone who is not an anatomy guru, the 2 big chest muscles that you have, I'm missing one of them. And that protects basically a lot it's big for movement. But also for me, with missing the ribs that are directly behind it, only means that I have skin protecting the upper portion of my lung. So again, if anyone knows cricket and knows the sport, the ball moves at upwards of about 90 miles an hour. And when you get hit by this, pretty much a rock, it can break bones, it can hurt, it can damage. And for me, if I was to get hit, it means it's anything from a slight winding to potentially a punctured lung and fatal injury. But most of the issues, I mean, I got over that side of it. That was something that I could deal with, and I found a way around that. But the main issues that it causes me on a daily basis are mechanical. So really the compensation of muscles that I have on my right side. So I have muscles in my right shoulder that are doing a job that a much larger muscle should do. So they become overactive, they hurt twice as much, they fatigue twice as quickly, they pull muscles and structures out of place. So that means that I have to do a lot of remedial work to pull them away, to relax them, to make sure I don't overwork them. And yeah, it's been probably a more, every day's a learning experience with it, I guess. And every day I'm sort of tweaking things and making sure that I'm doing things in the right way. But from a young age upwards, I just learned to find a way around it, learned to find a way to compensate for anything that I was missing, and then wasn't really treated any differently as a youngster from my family side. So from mum and dad, I've got a younger brother who's only 14 months younger than me, and he's fully able-bodied, and yeah, the reason being is that it's not like a hereditary condition. It's completely random. There's no known cause to it. So yeah, just one of those things that you just happen to be born with. And I think as much as anything, I'm just constantly learning as much as I can about it, of what it means for me. And then the brilliant thing is I'm meeting more people with it, sort of, whether that's online or actually in person.
Like you said, having a brother obviously tends to mean you have quite a sporty upbringing. So I assume you played a lot of sports. When was it that you decided that cricket was the one you wanted to do? And from that point onwards, was it just complete laser focus?
Yeah, so luckily, but my upbringing, mum and dad, because I had Brad, my younger brother, so close in age, we were able to not be treated any differently. So whatever I was doing, he was doing. Whatever he was doing, I was doing. And then cricket came about, where my granddad just introduced it in the garden, and then you've got both my brother and I can play against each other. So I'll have the ball, he'll have the bat. So he became more of a batsman, I became more of a bowler. And that just grew and grew, and then introduced to sport at school. And mum and dad were just, I never really remember a moment where mum and dad said, don't do something. The only thing I can remember was they were very, very aware that if I played a sport like rugby, that's where I could really do myself some damage. So I vividly remember being at a session at school, a PE session, where the PE teacher said, right, we're playing rugby. And I had to pull him aside and just say, I can't play rugby. Like, this is something that I've got this condition. And I think that, weirdly, I've never thought of this now or even verbalized it out loud, that was probably the first time I'd ever openly spoken about my condition to another person outside of my immediate family. And that's how interesting is that? I've never really done that. And I was just said to them, look, I can't play rugby, this is why. And they allowed me to just chill, unless it was like tag rugby. It's pretty much like playing it, isn't it? So growing up, I didn't really feel too different from anyone else. But then really, as I started getting more and more into like PE at school, that just became the thing that I wanted to do. I just wanted to be active. I really enjoyed moving my body. I really enjoyed being sporty, competing. And I think that competitive nature came from having my brother. I do believe that I wouldn't have been a professional cricketer if it wasn't for my brother, because that competitive nature wouldn't have been instilled in me. But from a cricket point of view, it started to develop or move towards cricket as other sports didn't work out. So we went to a cricket club, and that's where it really kicked in. That was like I found this passion for competing in cricket, found this passion for being an opening bowler. And then from around that time, I'm sort of around anywhere between the age of like 10 to 13. But so around 13, 14 was when mum tells me this story. And funny enough, I've had him on my podcast, Jason Gillespie. We were off on a holiday, and I saw Jason Gillespie, and I'd been watching cricket live, and I had a passion for it. So we'd been to see Sussex play games, and I'd watched it on TV, and I was really into it. But then I saw Jason Gillespie at this restaurant in Barbados when we were on holiday, seeing some family friends out there, and I just sat there staring at him. I was like, "That's it. I want to be a cricketer." And then from that moment on, it was just all in on trying to find a way to become a professional cricketer, and setting the goals from then on of how I was going to do it, what I needed to get into, what it needed to look like, and from that moment on, really.
Yeah, it seemed like you had just an unwavering dedication and motivation to play professional cricket throughout your childhood. And I think I've heard you say before that when you were born, the doctors actually said you shouldn't play cricket at all because of your condition. And that itself actually fed into your motivation because you just wanted to prove them and all the doubters wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't conscious in that moment of being told, but mum and dad literally kept reminding me that as I was older, they really did keep reminding me all the time that you weren't really meant to play sport. And I think someone tells you can't do something, there's a lot of us that will deep down try that little bit harder. I think it's probably the next bit that's really, really important. And that is that I think all of us, if you're said, right, don't do, you can't do this, we will, I believe that most of us will have this tendency to say, yes, I can. And we will jump into it. But it's that next step that's actually the important part, which is you're more than likely to fail at the next step. So the next step is because you're not good at whatever it is that someone said you're going to pursue. So, right, go into cricket. Okay. And I remember going in and failing and being dreadful and not learning it, being ugly. And that moment right there is when it's actually the biggest change in mindset for an individual. It's not necessarily the motivation of being told you can't. It's, can you deal with those first failures, those little moments that you start with, and can you keep going after those? That's where the motivation kicks in. The someone saying you can't do something is the storyline as to why you're carrying on and you're persevering. But really, it's delving into failing first, going again, getting back up, try again. That, I believe, is something that I had a good ability at doing, rather than this gritty determination of holding on to this one line that a doctor said, and trying to prove them wrong. So yeah, that's really how I see that whole story, and that's probably changed over time, because at the time I was like, yeah, maybe I'll prove them wrong, but really looking back in retrospect, it's about failing and getting back up.
And I think that ability to know that it's the next step is something that you seem to have had since you were a child, really. Because I was listening to your podcast, a big fan of your podcast, and you were saying that you went to a cricket camp and there's that classic thing where you have to hold out the bat in your top hand and it's straight, and you weren't able to do that. And at that age, that would put quite a lot of kids off, I think. But you obviously had the sort of maturity to know that it's about the next step and about bouncing back.
Yeah, I literally remember that day, weirdly, because it's like a scarring moment. And my mum, and funny enough, the coach that told me to do that, just hold this cricket bat up with your arm. And the problem was they were asking me to hold this cricket bat up that was on my wrong side. It was on my right side. That's the weakest side, and it's my weakest arm. And I just couldn't do it. And I just remember like bawling my eyes out after. I was like, I'm dreadful. Like, this is a former professional cricketer telling me to do this, and he's doing it with ease, and why can't I do it? Now, I don't know, I can't really remember too much what I went about after that, but all I remember was trying to do that movement over and over again, and trying to do that and trying to work on it. And then after a while, once I realized that I couldn't physically do that because that was a limitation of mine, I found out what it was that I could do. So how could I use my left arm a little bit more to help me out rather than using my right arm? But it really was probably a trigger for me that allowed me to see what a professional could do, and then where I needed to be to get there. Because that's pretty much how I went about my goals, went about my journey of becoming a pro. Was, what does a pro look like? What are all the attributes they have physically, mentally, and then work my way back and how I can get to that point.
And one of the things you did do to try and carry yourself to that point, which was your ultimate goal, to become a professional cricketer, was you visualised becoming a professional cricketer, and you visualised that moment of receiving a contract at Sussex. And that spurred you on, really, didn't it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like, I'm a big believer in visualization. Like, I teach it to a lot of athletes I work with, and I recommend it to anyone that is trying to set a goal, set a target, whatever they're trying to work towards, in really using visualization as a strong tool of being able to imagine what you do, the feeling, the emotion, but ultimately what it might look like and what you might look like in order to get what you want. So for me, it was signing. Initially, it was signing a contract. It was getting given a cap, getting given a shirt, and that was something that a storyline that I just told myself over and over again, especially in moments when I was struggling, especially moments when I was potentially injured, and I would be out on runs, and I would be visualizing signing that contract, and just and overcoming or kind of beating the competition of the people who were fighting for that contract as well. And I always used to think, like, these guys aren't going to be out on this run that I'm doing now, and that for me just put confidence in myself, put motivation in myself. And I'd always use, especially in moments of doubt and in moments of low self-confidence, I would recognize what made me unique. So even though I could tear away, or I could bring out all these negatives, I could tear myself down with, I've got this condition and I'm so much weaker than everyone else, I'm so far behind everyone else, I actually looked to all the skills and attributes that I had that would be valuable as a pro. And I was like, those are good things. Keep remembering that, keep building that strength, keep doing that. And that was all a part of the visualization process of what I could look like in the future. And a huge motivation for me trying to get there.
Yeah, visualization is definitely a powerful tool to motivate yourself and prepare yourself. But I guess the only negative of it is, if you visualize getting this contract and becoming a professional cricketer, and you had such an unwavering focus on it, that would put a lot of pressure on you. And if you ended up not realizing your dream, then you'd just be absolutely devastated. So did you feel that pressure?
Yeah, you do. But I always felt like I had a plan B, and I always had like okay, if I get knocked down at this hurdle, if this is the hurdle I'm going to get knocked down at, what can I do once I've picked myself back up? Where can I go next? And that there's always another way. There's always another way that you can find a way to get where you want to be. So focusing on failing at whichever one you've started on, whichever path you've started on, is not an issue. Like, it's fine that if you fail at that, you will fail again in the future, and just find a new route, find a new way of going about it. And I think that was how I always thought about it. So for example, if I didn't get the contract at Sussex, then I was like, well, maybe I'll get a contract somewhere else, and I'll show someone else that I've got this drive and determination, and I won't stop until I've really wrung every rag dry there. And that was, I think, yeah, really, that was my focus on that.
I think that's such a good viewpoint to have. And I guess one of those moments would have been when you were around 16, you had 2 years where you didn't actually play cricket at all, did you? And at that point, that's such a crucial point in the development of an athlete. Did you go through self-doubt? Was there any moments where you thought this might not happen, and how did you cope with that?
I think the biggest emotion I felt throughout all of that was literally physical pain. So I was in pain with my back. So I'd fractured it. I was in this corset for it to mend, and it was just you're right. You're 16 years old. It's like meant to be the best time of your life, and you're at school, you're with your mates, and it's easy going living. And I was, like I said, in this back brace, and so I just remember coming back from like the surgeon who'd said, you got to stop playing cricket. You've broken your back. You got to stop playing. You got this condition, like, you shouldn't play. Got in the car, was extremely sad, and like, my dad didn't say anything for a little while, but then straight away, I think the first thing that he said was like, right, get in touch with this physio, get in touch with this trainer, and see how you can build yourself back. Just start again. And so there was no conversation around give up, stop. It was, how can we get back? Like, you'll be fine. How can you get back? And then it just flipped straight away into figuring out what I was going to do, how I was going to build back, where did I need to be at, I'd really drew on stories from other athletes who had injuries that potentially threatened their career. And that's where I drew a lot of inspiration from. I was like, if someone else has done it before, I'll do it. And I think that's a real powerful tool as well, drawing on other athletes, drawing on their stories, how they go about it. And that really is a very humanistic trait for us to be drawn into stories of other players and other people with stories of adversity and something that resonates with you. Now, I couldn't find anyone that had my condition and lean on them, but I found people of similar stories or similar issues or problems that they'd faced, and that's where I drove my inspiration from there. But it wasn't too long of dwelling on the negative. There was definitely self-doubt along the way, for sure. Like when you're in the gym trying to rebuild your body and it's not working and it's just not going the way you want. But I would go back to what I just said, which was find that strength, that unique story that you have of yourself, and keep telling yourself that's valuable. That's valuable. This is my unique view on the world. This is my unique skill in the world, and that's where your motivation comes from.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so incredible about your story is like giving up just isn't in your character at all. And for a lot of athletes, it would have been very easy to say, right, no, I'm out of the game for 2 years. I'm in a really crucial part of my formative years, and it would be easy for me to give up. But you thought, no, I want to be a professional cricketer. I'm going to get through this moment. And you did. And you ended up getting the professional contract at Sussex shortly after. That must have been a great relief when that happened, and just a reward for all your hard work paying off.
Yeah, I still say now that it was my most incredible achievement in the game. There's games that you win, there's games that were epic, and there's sharing moments with like your teammates, but there's so much unknown when you're going into trying to become or from my side, there was so many unknowns of whether I would become a professional cricketer, and then the day you get told that you've sort of achieved what you set out to do, yeah, there was no better feeling for me. And everyone's got their own different path, and it means certain different things for them. But just looking back at how much I'd overcome and how much I'd fought to get there, and then luckily, I remember the day I got told that I was going to get a contract. My physio, who'd seen me broken, beaten, and the analyst at the club at the time, who had seen me from a junior, like this young kid who was in and around the cricket scene from a young age, he was involved at the club, and I got to know him really well. And we were driving back to the hotel after that game, and they were both like, we couldn't be prouder of anyone. Like, we couldn't be prouder of anyone else for achieving what you did. And that was such a real special moment for me, because they were two guys that weren't involved in the game as in selection or giving me the contract. They were support staff in the team, and they were just incredibly proud of what I'd done. And again, that was probably the first time I'd heard someone else outside of either myself or my immediate family being proud of what I'd achieved, which was really, really cool. And probably my most special memory of playing cricket and achieving what I did. Yes, the games were awesome, and there's some highlights along the way, but I don't think for every athlete that moment you turn pro, it's so special.
And for your first few games, obviously a lot of people would be getting incredibly nervous, but with you having visualised it for so long and you've known for so long that this is where you were meant to be, did it almost just feel like you sort of just deserved to be there, and were nerves reduced because of that? Or was it...
No, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. It is terrifying. Like for me, it was. But if I'm honest, in retrospect, it wasn't necessarily me. I had self-belief, I had self-confidence, but for me, it was actually the people around me. There was a little bit of a culture that put you down. There was a little bit of a culture that really belittled you as a player coming in. Now, myself and some other players that managed to get through that, we always spoke about that it was actually the ones in that squad, the younger guys in that squad, we were the ones that had like the thicker skin. We had sort of a bit more of that self-belief. But there was a lot of self-doubt among a lot of the younger players that were trying to get in. And I see a lot of environments now, and I try to create environments for players that if they're new to squads, they're really embraced, they're really brought in. And that changed massively as we were going on. But I went into the team when there was a real change in guard. We had been the most successful team in the past decade, and now we were starting to lose players through retirement, through injuries, and they were really transitioning the squad over. So they were handing it over to a lot of younger guys, and they didn't really know how to handle it. But the problem was the environment wasn't conducive to allowing those players to be fully confident, especially when you hadn't proved yourself. So you, as a young player, you're going to mess up, you're going to fail, you're going to suck at things to begin with, and you're going to get it wrong. And if the environment doesn't allow you to do that, or at least catch you when you fall and not nail you and beat you into the ground and make you feel 2 feet tall, that is a much better environment to be in. And I think we didn't have that when I began. So I just remember playing my first game, making my first class debut, being terrified at what my teammates would say about me than what I thought of myself, or what the crowd thought of me, or the journalists thought of me. I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking about, what do my teammates think of me, which in this hindsight is just it was so wrong. But I would quickly move to, luckily you've got your processes, the way you go about doing your skill, which you can flick to and you're trying to execute. And yeah, I think I probably would have enjoyed it a little bit more. I would have enjoyed it a little bit more if I'd had that environment. But at the same, it's a tough one, because at the same time, I think that environment made me a hardened person that was able to deal with a lot of stress and deal with a lot of setbacks and really build that resilience for a little bit longer. But maybe it was to my detriment at some stage, where I wasn't able to let everyone in. And yeah, so a real interesting start, and definitely not easy. Like, it's not for me it wasn't easy, for sure.
That's fascinating you say that, because there are so many pressures impacting sports people, as you've mentioned, fans, media, yourself, coaches, but the one you don't think of is teammates. And it's not great that was one of the things that's playing on your mind when you were starting out in your career. And the most successful dressing rooms are the ones where there's a really cohesive environment and a really relaxing environment and comfortable environment for young cricketers like yourself when you were starting out. When you were having those pressurized moments at the start of your career, did you have any techniques that you could fall back on? Like nowadays, you've got your yoga and your meditation, which we'll delve into later. But during your career, did you have anything that you used to relax yourself and mentally tune yourself?
I didn't have a technique, and kind of just a little bit on pressure, really. There's you said you didn't really know that your teammate, or you haven't thought about teammates being a pressure. There's ultimately like three things that will build pressure for an athlete, and there's consequence, so whether you're going to win or lose. There's peer pressure, so there's peers, and then there's judgment, and that judgment can come from your judgment of yourself, the coach's judgment, the judgment. But if one of those things is in a, say, training session, that will create pressure. If you can get all three, then that'll create a high pressured scenario. So we've just had a training session here with the group that I run out here in Adelaide, and I really wanted to put them under pressure. I just felt like they weren't getting the consequence side of it. They weren't seeing the consequence. So it's like, okay, so if consequence isn't working and judgment potentially isn't working here, I think we've got to go to peers. I think we've got to find a way to get. So we did a training session recently where the lads were batting and bowling, and there's probably about 20 of them, and we would get 2 batters to bat and 2 bowlers to bowl. And usually at a training session, everyone else goes and does their own thing, and then you pull them in and went. But this time, 2 batters batting, 2 bowlers bowling, and then everyone else lining the net, watching them, just watching those guys train, and just eyes on. And then I got them to say things to each other, getting them to, and it was really interesting just to see who saw having their own teammates' eyes on them that actually changed how they went about it. And my then guidance for them was how you deal with that. So going on to now the second part of your question, which is the technique. Now, for me, to begin with, I didn't have a technique. I just got along with it. I tried to lean on my training as much as I could and go back to the things that I'd been practicing. And I used to think quite technically about what I did. So I think I would be very aware of where I had good body awareness, because my condition gives me good body awareness. I would think about where my body was in space, and if I executed where my body was in space, then I know my skill is going to be thereabouts. But really, as I started to get older, I really tuned in my process, which I wish I'd done earlier, but it was through a coach that was very good for me, and he taught me that process and tweaked to that process constantly. And so when it got to a pressurized situation, I could just hone in on that process and just try and execute that to my best ability. Everything before, after, and sometimes even during comes down to where your mind is at. So if your mind is fully engaged in on that process and what you're trying to execute, then hopefully that pressure gets reduced. doesn't mean you're going to win. It just means that you have the better chance of executing your skill under pressure. So I learned that along the way. But to begin with, I didn't have that. So there was this night and day between when I didn't have this, what I was leaning on, and I failed under pressure quite a bit. And then when I started to actually learn a little bit more about me and learn how I dealt with pressure. And that's where I kind of this what if, and I put it on my Instagram recently, this what if feeling of if I was still playing now, I would love it, because I have such a better understanding of where my mind is at certain moments. I have such a better understanding of how to deal with that pressure, how to physically change my body chemistry in that time, and how to physically grab a hold of the emotion and the even if you call them butterflies, or the fight or flight reaction that you might have, and how to quash that. And so those are techniques that you can be learned. They're techniques that I enjoy teaching people. But I think if you can match them up with building a pressure scenario and then teaching people along the way, they see how relative it is. Because I had conversations with, say, psychologists who said, if you're going to be nervous, just accept your nerves. And I thought, well, that's really good advice. That's really great advice, that I can accept my nerves and just not let them be there with me. And it's quite a mindful exercise that you would do. But that falls short when I'm in the middle and I'm on my own and my heart's racing, my mind's everywhere, and I'm telling myself, accept your nerves. And I'm like, great, I've accepted my nerves, but now I'm terrified and I don't know how to deal with this. I didn't have like a go-to, a technique or a strategy that, and that's what we want as an athlete. We always need sort of this process, a go-to that you can kind of remember. And so even if you have that process and you fail at that process, that's something you can learn, because then you can review at the end of a game and go, did I do my process? No, I didn't do my process. Okay, I'll go to training, I practice my process again, I come back and do it again. And then hopefully you'll see that in competition.
And sticking with pressure, and one thing I find fascinating about you is you were playing for a number of years, but you didn't actually tell that many people about your condition, kind of because you wanted to be known as a cricketer for the left arm bowler who gets fifers, rather than the person who's succeeded when the odds were stacked against him, kind of thing. But do you think if you had been more open about that, it would have added more pressure, because you sort of would have been a bit more well known for that one characteristic?
Yeah, I just think I did it because at the time I didn't know how to deal with my condition myself. So I wasn't either comfortable with it myself. I didn't know how to talk about it without people perceiving it as a weakness, even though so many people have gained inspiration from it. I just personally didn't know how to do it. I also don't think that media in sport had got that far yet, especially in cricket. I think it had in other sports. I think media, like literally after I retired, sort of Sussex really became really active on social media. And I have no doubt that if someone had found out about it early, right now when I was playing, they'd have made a piece on it. They wanted to use it, and they would have started talking about it. I mean, I could have said no for sure, but I never spoke about it because I was probably egotistically trying to protect myself, to trying to show that I was the same as everyone else. It doesn't matter. And in my mind, the way it all sort of unfolded was kind of how I wanted it to, which was I finish my career, or some people start finding out about it and they're shocked that they find out about it and go, wow, I didn't know that you were doing this. You're playing alongside us and you're dealing with this alongside it. That's quite incredible. Which was kind of how it went. And that's where I really gain inspiration from myself and motivation from myself, is that to know that I achieved what I achieved and I set out what I did with what I had, means that there are so many more people that can do that. And I think it does take a moment to accept your adversity that you have. So that's where I changed my point of view. And this is what I mean by I started to accept my condition, accept what challenges I had. And once I started to accept them rather than fight them or fall to them, then I was able to recognize that I could really overcome a lot of different things.
I think that's a really powerful mantra to have, and it's sort of reframing your mindset. So you're not just looking at your weakness and not dwelling on your weakness, but instead forgetting that and focusing on your strength and turning that strength into a super strength. And that's just a really positive attitude to have, I think.
Yeah, I always talk about that being a huge element. Just remember what you do well. Remember what it is that you are good at, because you are going to tell yourself what you need to get better at. Now, if you're going into training and you're not working on your weaknesses, like you should be trying to, but if you're also not in that training session working on the strengths and giving yourself that motivation to continue, then you're only going to keep falling. And that's just going to create a real negative cycle in what you're doing, because you'll just try something that you're currently not good at or developing, and then you're just going to keep falling down. You're just going to keep, and that's painful. Like, that is painful. So you need to remember what it is that you're good at, and like you said, build that strength into a super strength.
I think with you, wasn't it the case that you were always the fittest or one of the fittest in the team? And it's obviously, we follow cricket a lot. That's something that Alistair Cook has talked about. He said that one thing he can control is how fit he is, and he's nearly always one of the fittest in the England team. So yeah, like you said, it is taking a setback, and then now the one thing you can control is how fit you are, and you made sure that you were always up there as one of the fittest.
Yeah, James Taylor spoke about it really well in my podcast with him. Obviously, his story is incredible and extremely sad as well at the same time. But he spoke about how just making himself fitter allowed him to do his skill for longer. Now, that's just physiology. Like, that's just, if you have a fitter capacity, you're not exerting as much energy, whether that's physical or mental, on the skill that you're doing, which means that you can do it for longer. So it's not a very woo-woo thing. It's just pure science. Like, you fitter you are, the better you're going to be at your sport. It's pretty simple. But I think fitness is a huge part, not only just for your physical side, but really for that mental side. There's not one person that I've played with where I've seen them putting in extra yards, putting in that little bit more effort in their physical training, and then it hasn't transferred over into their performance on a mental side, because they just go that little bit more. They just, whether they enjoy doing that physical work or not, but they just do it, they will go that little bit longer. They're the ones that, in those tough situations in the trenches when you need them, they're the ones that you can lean on that little bit more.
Yeah, and you always were the one at the top of the fitness tests, and you did put in this huge effort into your training. But I guess on the flip side of that, you could say that because you were putting in so much effort into your cricket and so much focus into your cricket, was there times when actually that put a mental strain on you and you had a bit of a burnout perhaps, and maybe felt a bit of a loss of love for the game? Because talking to you now, it strikes me as someone who just loves cricket. But was there ever a time when that wasn't the case?
Yeah, funny enough, like, now's a time where I struggle with enjoying the game. And I think that's more apart from, because I'm not playing anymore and I'm playing for enjoyment, and I'm very conscious of my body and what I want to achieve with my body, and for longevity purposes, I tussle with that a little bit more because I had like this purpose. But at the time, I didn't really. I think when I was playing, I had this real sense of purpose of what I was doing. I drew inspiration from being someone in the community that was sort of a leader in their area, and then could influence other people and inspire other people. So if there was a community engagement thing that the club had set up, I would go to it. And that's what I would really throw myself into, which was continue and engage with people that potentially outside of the sport, because I saw myself as a representative of not only the club, the sport, but myself and my family. And that really helped, I think, for me.
We go on to your retirement. Obviously, that was enforced through injury. You suffered a really terrible back injury when you were 6 years into your career. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what was going through your head when you were told that probably retirement was your best option?
Yeah, it's a day that I just remember, like 7th of July 2016, just bowling this one ball in a warm-up game. I was playing the best I'd ever played. I was ready to play against a tour match against Pakistan, and my back went just literally a searing pain through, and I'd felt it before, having had the injury before in my life. but I had to be like carried off the pitch. Got told to go have an MRI that night, and I just remember fighting with the physio, going like, the MRI doesn't show anything. This is useless. We know this is no good. It's a waste of my time, and I'm like grumpy in this MRI, but I'm also in pain. And we did the MRI, and then get the results back literally that next morning. And the physio rung me, and I was in my flat, and physio just said, "Can you? The scans come back, and it's shown a fracture, and it's worse than before. Can you come in and chat?" And I remember going into the club to just go and chat to him, and I think I just deep down knew it was really bad, like something was really bad, and I saw him. I walked up to the changing room, saw him, literally locked eyes with him, and then I left the room immediately because I just started bawling my eyes out, and that was it. And I just couldn't. I just had to go and be alone on my own, and I rung my dad straight away, and I told him that I'd got injured, and I had a fracture. And my dad's quite a stoic person. He doesn't really show too much emotion, and he said something with like this. I could hear this emotion in his voice when he said it, and he just said, "Lewis, I'm so sorry." And I just had to put the phone down. It just threw me. Like, it really got me, and I just crumbled there, because I ultimately knew what it meant. I knew that even if I overcame the injury, it was going to happen again, because it had happened again, and this was now the third time it had happened. But now this time was worse off than it'd ever been. So then going into the surgeon and asking him what he thought, he just was like, "This is either going to happen again or you stop." And I can't tell you where it stops. I can't tell you where that line ends. All we know is this fracture is moving, and that was it. So just making that decision to call it is a real tough one. And I think at the time I was kind of just going through and just going like, yeah, I'm retiring, and you're kind of drifting through space. And then the last day happens where you're pretty much a professional cricketer in that last day, and then it really hits you, and the emotions go from like sad and sort of overwhelmed, I guess, to then just, who am I? Like, what am I doing? Like, what am I? And a real tough journey, probably for the next 2 years, really. I think actually was, for me, it was 2 years that it took me to figure out who I was and what I was going to do. And I guess we're all still piecing it together now, the world we live in, but very, 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 very tough. And something that even just now reflecting back on it, just slows me down, and it just makes me think about it. And I think about it daily. I honestly do. I think about it daily. And I think that's because I'm involved in sport, and I'm involved with people's journeys that they're doing, and you can't help reflect on your own, and think about where it would be now, or what you could be doing. And yeah, it's just something you're never prepared for.
I think a lot of sports people have that initial identity loss, and they also really miss that competitive spirit as well, and competing and working towards a goal. And I guess that's what you had as well, because didn't you then go and trial for Paralympic swimming team?
Yeah, so that was a bit of a like opener for me, and it gave me the opportunity to try and work towards that sort of goal. But just sadly, after a year of training, going to the assessment, they assess my condition, and I just fall into this category where I have a condition, but the classification system doesn't have a classification for my condition. So I'm neither fully able-bodied enough to compete in sort of like Olympic swimming, neither unable-bodied enough to compete in para swimming. So I was left in this limbo, and that was like retiring, because that's really like a full whack in the face where you're like, I can't achieve something as an athlete, and that's what I was hoping to do. So yeah, then after that, that's really where I started focusing on what else I could do.
And one of those things that you found that you can do is yoga, and it's a big part of your life now. You have set up Sport Yogi, which is looking to introduce athletes to the field of yoga and introduce them to the benefits of it. Can you tell us a little bit more about the yoga you do and Sport Yogi?
So yeah, I'd actually started yoga as a cricketer. So when I was in sort of about my fourth year one of my coaches I was getting little hamstring tears and little niggles that most athletes get. And my coach had said, why don't you try yoga? I've done a little bit. Why don't you try it out? And I was like, nah, it's not. It's for hippies. It's for skinny white women drinking lattes. Like, it's not for me. And the super flexible, definitely not me. But I just gritted my teeth and decided to try it out one day. And then after that, I just started feeling so much better. I went from getting an injury every 3 months to not getting a single one in 18 months. And the club then started to introduce yoga as a compulsory thing for the players to do, because I was doing it and seeing success in it. And they're like, if Lewis isn't getting injured, no one's going to get injured, sort of thing. But after I finished, I was like, that was really tough for me to get into it. And it's really valuable. How can I take what yoga, meditation, mindfulness has and give it to athletes in a way that resonates with them, or is at least delivered to them in a way that they would need it? Whether it's recovering after a match, dealing with your nerves before a match, and all of and understanding your mind, understanding your body, really about that self-awareness. That for me was a big part of finding a way to deliver this to other athletes, because I didn't have it myself. And you just typed in yoga for athletes on Google and there was nothing there. So that's where I decided to go and travel out to Hawaii, and I decided to learn to become a yoga teacher. And I went to my yoga teacher training there, and that was a real experience, and the reason I went to Hawaii is because I wanted to do something that was super spiritual. Like, I wanted to go to the far end of it, and I wanted to understand it, because I didn't want to do it in like a yoga studio in London. And as soon as you come out the studio, you're just in Starbucks. I wanted to be immersed in a real spiritual experience, so that I could take this egotistical mind of mine that thought about it in a certain way, and then have it challenged, have the way I thought of things challenged, and the way I saw the world challenged, and see if I could see it in a different way. And it did. It just completely took me to another place. And once I was able to experience that, once I was experiencing this different version of myself, then come back and put it with almost reality, which is how the everyday person who is maybe not as self-aware, who is maybe not engaged in that part of their body or their mind, how can I merge those together and speak to you like I'm speaking now, and really give it to you in a way that resonates with you as an athlete? Because at the end of the day, we may go into our own room and we'll think we need this stuff, and that's where we'll engage with it. But if we're in a team environment, we'll rise our egos up and we won't talk about it. We'll push it back with all the stereotypes that yoga or mindfulness or meditation could possibly have, especially for men. So that was where I started coming up with the ideas, and really that's where Sport Yogi was built.
It seems with yoga, like you said, if you get past those initial stereotypes, there's obviously such physical benefits. But even when listening to you speak to Cameron Bancroft, he was saying about how he was going through probably the most difficult period of his life mentally, in terms of all that media scrutiny around the ball tampering scandal, and yoga ultimately helped him through that. So there's clear mental benefits to it as well.
Massively. So even if it's just you understanding your body a little bit more, and like I mentioned, I'm a little bit more body aware because of my condition, so I kind of feel in tune with my body at most times. But just opening up a place where you can be in tune with your body will allow you to start to understand where your mind's at. Because, for example, you could run through like a 10-minute yoga session where you're just stretching, just physically doing something. And then after you feel this physical release, which is your muscles letting go, you feel more relaxed, but then your mind is going to feel more relaxed. So then you see the difference in how your body feels. And that's where it started to get for me. I know that most people that get into yoga go through it through the physical doorway, and then the mental doorway comes later. And that is why. It's because once you feel this physical change, you then recognize the mental change that comes with it. So that's where I started. That's where I got to. And now it's really about the mental benefit from it, because, geez, right now in the world we're living in, we need it more than ever. And I think, if anything, the world we live in with the pandemic and what's happened over the last year, it's really brought in an understanding of where people's minds are at. Probably the next step they need is just how they're going to manage it and what their lifestyle looks in order to maintain it. It's not really about beating your mental health back with a broom on and trying to find that resilient person that you once were, that's still there. It's just clouded in loads of different storylines that you're telling yourself every day. And all it takes is a little bit of awareness. It takes a little bit of time to practice the skill of understanding where your mind is at any one time. And that doesn't only just make you a better athlete, it makes you a better person. It allows you to become a better communicator to yourself and to other people. And then that starts to build a better athlete. That's a better athlete in my mind.
Yeah, I think something that can both tune your physical attributes and your mental attributes is going to be something that's going to be very positive for an athlete. But I guess it's still sort of in its infancy with athletes using yoga. Obviously, Ryan Giggs swore by it, and he said that it extended his career because it obviously helped him physically, but also mentally it helped him to tune in properly as well. Have you found that you've had skepticism from athletes who you've tried to get involved in yoga, or do you find people are now starting to warm towards it now?
I think it's becoming more globally known and acceptable, and that's because brands are bringing it in a certain way. And again, that's a part of what I want to do, which is I think brands bring it to the general public quite well. So the general public engage with something like yoga quite well because as a vast majority, the general public tend to be, there's going to be groups and pockets of people that are open-minded to take it on and potentially need it. But for a sports dynamic, you're taught from a very young age, like boys be brave, girls be hard workers, and even the female side of it is still a stoic vision on sport. Even any female athletes that I've spoken about is how much lack of empathy and compassion sometimes they've experienced in their whole journey of sport. And I think sport has that picture board of what it should look like and how an athlete should behave and what it should do. And yoga really goes the other direction. And that's only through marketing, really. So that's where I'm going with the brand, is that I'm taking that marketing and just angling it towards sports people in the way that I know that resonates with them. So whether it's actually playing with their competitive side, whether it's playing on their perhaps more compassionate side, maybe their more empathetic side, whichever way it is angled at an individual, you'll have athletes that deep down will have a motivation to be better than someone else, whether that's on their own team or someone they're going against. And I'm just offering something that will make them a better athlete, but is perhaps hard to engage with if you go out to it in the normal world, because it's being marketed to the everyday person and not you as an athlete with your mindset. And so it's really about honing that message in onto them so that they get it, because there is so much pushback, whether it's from an individual, teams, and they're like, we see the value in it, we really see the value in it, but it's for hippies, it's for women, it's for the super flexible, and there's all these stereotypes that are already drawn to it because of how the general public are having it marketed to them, and that's all you see. So now I'm trying to create a market where it's at you as an athlete. This hasn't got to, you haven't got to go and do it in a class for 60 minutes and have someone chanting at you. You can do it in your own home. You can do it where you want and have it delivered to you in a way that is for your sport, for your lifestyle, for what you're doing in sport.
I think, yeah, it's odd, isn't it? Because I was just reading up before, obviously, having this interview, and I was looking at athletes who have used yoga to enhance their career, and I've read about Ray Lewis, who's probably one of the toughest elite sportsmen that potentially we've ever seen. You know, NFL, it's an incredibly macho sport, but he was talking about how he used yoga to enhance his career. Through sport yogi, have you seen the benefits across a range of different sports? Obviously, on your podcast, you have people from all different sports. So have you been helping people from all different areas?
Yeah, it's amazing the sports that people play. I do like a little poll every now and then on Instagram of who plays what sport, and it's really a range. I mean, there's a lot of cricketers on there because people have just found my name through cricket, but no, there's a real range of athletes, and I think you're right. I think someone like Ray Lewis telling that he's doing yoga, I wouldn't be surprised if, say, in the next 5 years, 10 years, whenever he retires, someone like Federer comes out, and because his training style is so under such wraps that we find out he was doing yoga. I don't think that's going to be a surprise. I don't think that there's so many athletes that do it without them screaming about it that you wouldn't know about. And I think that's actually what makes them different. I think that's what makes them, because it's not even a fact that they're doing the act of yoga, the movement, or even the meditation, the mindfulness. It's the mindset that they're kind of willing to do something different to what everyone else is doing. They don't push back from it. They don't push it away. They bring it in. And this stems from where it was a tipping point for me, which was when I was tussling with it. My coach at the time just said, "Why wouldn't you do it? Why? What have you got to lose? How is this designed to make you worse? And why would you not want to turn over every stone that you could to make yourself better? Doesn't mean you have to accept it all the time and you have to run with it, but what this could make you better in so many different ways. So why would you not embrace it?" And that for me was the trigger that got me into it. And that was kind of the mantra that I would tell myself, even when I potentially didn't want to do it. Because I'm like, no, this isn't a thing that I'm doing to just help me. This is actually almost like an identity and something that I can be proud of, because I'm wanting to be different.
It definitely sounds like a really positive thing for a sports person to get involved with. One of the other things you're doing at the moment, Joel's just mentioned, is your podcast, Raise Your Game, where you've been talking to some elite athletes from a whole range of sports. You've been talking about the mental side of sport. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you've learned from the people you've spoken to?
Yeah, Raising Your Game is designed to just find out the stories, the insights and the ideas from all athletes that are coming on, and every athlete has a different story, and that's really what connects with people. The stories of athletes, it connected with me as a young athlete, hearing the stories of people that had adversities, that had potentially been in a similar position from me. And really the goal of it is to give a few tips from that person's journey of how they can build their body, their mind, their emotional state, their spiritual state, whatever it potentially would be, but as a holistic look as an athlete. But if it can connect with an athlete just through the journey that person experienced, because that journey may be similar to whoever's listening, and that can trigger something in someone else, then that's something that I'd like to have the podcast doing, and I know it's doing. So that's for me is where it sort of stemmed from. And initially it was, I guess, for me, just wanting to speak to these athletes and hear their stories and hear that what they were going through, and find out from a selfish point of view, and really delve into their story and get to meet them and find out a little bit more about them, what made them tick, what can I learn? I'm learning from them as much as I can, and really trying to find out their views and how I can throw that into what I do. So yeah, there's always something for someone in each of those episodes, and I also throw out the odd episode where I run off my own insight and experience and things that I've learned along the way, which are valuable to athletes, and how they can manage their own experience, whether that again is amateur or professional.
I think it's really, firstly, accessible, and second, really powerful way to do it, because I think if you take the Jason Gillespie episode, for example, you just assume that someone like that, 70-odd tests, one of the most successful bowlers ever, you just assume that from 11 he was on this pathway, and you just went through all the different Australia age groups. But it's so good to hear that he just was like playing fourth grade cricket, and then one day he really made a decision, and from 16, 17 went for that. It's not the path you'd expect, and I think for young cricketers out there hearing that, it really would give them the confidence, I think.
Yeah, and any athlete, like the path that you may think you need to take is not necessarily the path that you have to take, or the one you will take. There's going to be, if I look at my own journey, like there would have been an element of me saying, right, I'm going to get into this age group representative, and then I'm going to jump up to this level, and I'm forging that path in my mind. Bang, injury, 2 years out of the game. Right, okay, wow, different path coming on now. Here we go. And that, I think, is where those stories become really valuable, because we love stories as human beings. That all of these different stories from people, you will find that they've all done it a different way. There are some similarities for sure, and that's the thing that's quite cool, is that you do see these similarities that are cropping up, but you also see how diverse those stories are, and how diverse the entry level is for each sport that they play, and it goes across all sports.
I think now more than ever as well, it's really important to open up those diverse success stories, because kids now, let's say you're a kid in 14, 15 and you're in an academy, literally on your phone you can look at the top 10 cricketers from all the counties around the country and see like who's in the England setup or who's going to a festival or something like that. It's quite difficult, I think, for kids in academies now, because it's so available to all these people to compare yourself to. So having these diverse stories in an accessible way, I think, is really, really good.
Yeah, and even on that point, that's such a good point. But I think it's what you do with what you see. So if you're on Instagram, and for sure this wasn't around, sounds like I'm really old, but like Instagram wasn't as accessible as it is now. It was kind of a thing that was being built. Facebook was being built, and growing up, I didn't get that inside knowledge that you get with all the athletes now. And I think you can use it for one or two ways. You can look at it and be disappointed with it, or you can feel inadequate with it, or you can look at it and go, I'm now getting knowledge. I'm now getting information of what I can do. So athletes are putting up how they're training. They're putting up how they think. They're putting up things they're trying to accomplish. So if it's something that you want to accomplish and it's an end goal like winning a trophy, then you can literally put that on your vision board and say, that's what I want to achieve. But all the other posts of them training and them doing their recovery, they're literally sending you the signals of what to do. They're telling you the roadmap of what you need to do. And that is something that when I was trying to become a pro, I had to go and find out. I had to go and talk to people. I had to go and ask, like, what does this player do? How does he train? What is the food he's eating? What sort of physical stuff that he's doing? So you have to go and ask them, and you have to find out that information bit by bit, or catch them doing it. Whereas now it's right in front of you. It's literally right in front of you. And I think it's the mindset you have when you see that information, you see that is what you do with it. So you can see it, you can dwell on it, you can feel inadequate about it, you can compare yourself. Your journey is your journey, and recognize where you're at, accept where you're at, and know that wherever you're at, you can get better. And that's the big part to start with. But then that information you have, use it in your best way possible.
I think it can be a bit toxic, because it could literally be 4:00 on a Saturday and you're playing a club game and you've literally just got a golden duck, and you could go back to the change room and the first thing you do is refresh Instagram, and I don't know, someone in the next county's just scored like 150 or something, and you're just there thinking, you are doing that comparison that you're talking about, and you're just feeling even more gutted than you should be. And it's quite hard to maybe deal with bad games when you're seeing online other people doing so well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess it's what you do with the information again. So whether you refrain from doing that, it's how you view that, how someone else is doing, whether you use it as motivation, whether it is purely your mindset around it. And it isn't easy for kids right now, but I don't think it's an excuse either. You spoke about how the under 12 game being a big game for you. And that's so true. Like the kids that we're coaching right now, they're from under 12 to under 16. And these kids are amazingly malleable in how they think. But one of the focuses we've had is removing result from the game. So removing result, I honestly am not that worried if they don't win a game, but I'm worrying. My focus is on their individual. I want them to focus on their own individual growth. And do they learn their process? So over the next 6 months, do they learn a little bit more about themselves? Do they understand like where their minds are at, where they're physically at? And that gives them a little bit more, and also incorporating a little bit more perspective onto them. So I'm letting them in with a little bit of understanding of where the seniors think and how because where they want to be is playing senior cricket with us guys. So I'm telling them how those guys think and what those guys value and what the actual perspective of it is, and then talking to them like I'm at their level, which is, guys, I won an under 15 trophy when I was a kid, but I couldn't tell you where that medal is right now. I couldn't. Do you know what I mean? In the scheme of things for me, I set my sights a little bit higher, and that can be daunting for some people. But also it just gives them perspective that you're just playing a game. You're going to play another game tomorrow or the week after. Like you'll play another game, and not making it as the be all and end all, I think, is the biggest part for them, because they're focusing on the result, and that the result they're focusing on the result, that is their value, that if they win, that makes them valuable, whereas we're teaching them that the value is from their ability to learn each day, improve each day. I find the most valuable, the ones that I reward and sort of praise the most, are the ones that are bettering themselves rather than getting the best results. I've got two kids who are my sort of like shining lights, and their results are not there. Like they're not really, like they haven't really got results. But it as a coach, it's not realistic for me to ask this kid right now to produce the results that I think he should, because he's learning, he's getting better, like he's on that journey. And I think if I can take that pressure away from him, so that he knows that there's no judgment on it, there's no pressure or consequence for it, that's going to help him out. That's going to help his mind out. I think is how I've dealt with that situation, having probably been in a very similar situation to you guys as a youngster.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting you say that, and that's a really positive way of coaching and mentoring. And the other thing I always think back when I think back to our time in cricket academies is the players who we played it with and against a lot of good players, but the ones who have made it professionally and made a career out of cricket aren't actually the ones who were the most talented at that young age. It was the ones who were the most mentally switched on and the ones who could deal with the pressure and had all those mental characteristics which we've discussed over the last hour. Those are the ones who have gone on to make it.
Yeah, and totally about like skills. I think if there's anything that, whether it's professional, cricket's a great example because it's got so many technical quirks to it and everyone's different. And I think if you can teach people that how you look doesn't matter, how you look doing the sport doesn't matter, it's literally how you just get to the end result. If you can find your own unique way of doing that, but that getting to the end result takes a mindset, it takes away. It's not necessarily going to look pretty every day. There's going to be marathon runners that I'm sure have got blisters on their feet one day and they will run their worst race. In their mind, it's not a clean race that they're running, but they'll just find a way to get to the end if their mindset's right. And it's the same in cricket, same in any sport, that you're right. If you're talented, I feel you lean on something or you feel there's an expectation for you to look a certain way. And I think that's what gets those talented ones. I challenge the ones in my group that are earmarked talented. And that's why I try to throw as much adversity their way. I try to throw as many setbacks as I can towards them because I know they need it. They need that. They need a setback first to just see where they're at mentally, so that's their learning part for them. Because at the moment their skills are good, they're perceived as talented because their skills are ahead of other people in their group, but that will fail at some stage because others will catch up skills eventually, and there will be others that can learn new skills if they're driven in the right way. But if we can grab that talented person, throw some adversity their way, throw some setbacks their way, and I mean this is not like a punishing thing, but this is just give them something that's going to make them challenge the way they think and be there to catch them and teach them how to deal with it rather than belittle them if they don't do it, or just write them off and go that, oh, this talented one, he can't deal with adversity, he can't deal with setback, can't deal with failure. No, this is learned behavior. You have to teach them how to deal with it. And I think that's where the ones that don't have that talent learn that innately as they go, because they'll just figure it out themselves. So you can nurture those and you can teach them the skills. And then the ones that have got the skills, they probably just need a little bit of what that other one has with the drive. And you're just trying to take a little bit from what they have and give to them. And then and then if you can do that with everyone, you've got a hell of a team.
Yeah, I think that's something as well that can be not only done at a young age, but it can be carried all the way through. Like even pros can do it. I was listening to Joss Butler. It was on a BBC podcast, and he was saying that he's at his best when he's focusing on the process and exploring different things and feeling like a kid again, exploring, playing different shots and enjoying learning about it rather than, like you said, with 12-year-olds focusing on the results. So it's clear that it works not only for 12-year-olds, it works for 30-year-olds as well at the elite level.
Yeah, and it shows in someone like his game how he's clearly got a creative mind. So he wants to feel like a kid. He wants to be in that phase of play, and he wants to be creative, and it just shows in his game. Like his game is very, very creative. So that is that's super interesting that someone like that feels that way, and who doesn't want to feel like a kid when you're facing some of the best bowlers in the world? It must be an amazing feeling. That is a great place to be.
That's been amazing, Lewis. Thanks so much.
No worries, guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Lewis. Really great to hear about your journey and all the stuff you're doing now as well. Really enjoyed it.
No worries. No worries.
I'm sure we could have talked for a long, long time, but we don't want to keep you any longer. But yeah, it's good to just hear as well from a cricket perspective as well, and something that's so deep in the mental side of it, because it is often athletes don't open up that much, and to have someone like you open up about it is really interesting. So thank you.
No worries. Take care.
Nice one, mate.
Bye.
It was such a pleasure to speak to Lewis and to hear his story and how committed he had to be to achieve his goal of becoming a professional cricketer. I thought it was interesting as well to hear how impactful a tool visualisation can be. He was saying that he would visualise signing his professional contract at Sussex when he was training, and then went on to do exactly that. And I think it's testament to how powerful a tool it can be.
Yeah, that was a really enjoyable interview, and it's hard not to feel inspired when talking to Lewis, because he's achieved so much in sport despite having Poland syndrome and being told that he'd never be able to compete. And it makes you think that if Lewis can achieve his goal of being a professional cricketer with his condition, then there really is no excuse not to realise your own ambitions. And I think what Lewis did so well was he focused on his strengths rather than dwelling on his weaknesses, and I think there's a lot to learn from that. And one of those strengths that he focused on was his work ethic. And I thought it was so interesting how he was talking about making sure he'd be the fittest player in the team, because ultimately that's something he can control. I also really enjoyed hearing his insights into the pressures of professional cricket and what he did to combat those pressures. It's mad to think that the biggest pressure he faced was actually from his own teammates. That, for me, was quite unexpected and just a really nice insight into the mindset of an elite athlete. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, and check out our YouTube, Instagram and Twitter for more content. We've had a lot of cricketers on recently, and our Lou Vincent, James Taylor and Jeremy Snape interviews have had some good feedback, so go check them out if you're interested.